Welcome dear students. In this session, I am going to talk about Middle English literature. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would understand what were the characteristics and what was the nature of the literature that was written in English language during the Middle English period. Well, the literature written in England during the Middle English period reflects the accurately and fairly changing fortunes of English. Literature, actually, in whichsoever language it is written or at whatsoever time it is written, it is a mirror of those times. Literature is not only a mirror of the times, it is also a mirror of the language or the languages that are used at that time. My dear students, literature also reflects another thing, and that is the social sensibilities of the people or the peoples of those times. During the time that French was the language best understood by the upper class in England, the books they read were all written in French language. All of the continental French literature was available for their entertainment and for their enjoyment. Now comes the question, how is a literature promoted? Well, there are certain ways through which a particular literature is promoted. The first and the foremost important factor is the interest of people. If people would be interested, if people would read that, if people would be able to relate to that, if people would be able to identify themselves with that, only then literature of a particular language would be promoted. The other possibility of how it can be promoted is the official patronage. The government, the rulers, the royalty and the nobility, how far they patronize, how far they support a particular literature, this is an important factor in the promotion of a particular literature. When it comes to the Middle Ages and it comes to the literature written at that time, mainly the patronage was given to French literature. The rewards that were given were all for the French literature. They were not, of course, initially at least, for English language. The literature in English that has come down to us from this period, that is somewhere from 1150 to 1250, that makes 1 century, is almost exclusively religious. The clerks, that is the religious clerks, the monks, the priests and other clergymen, they would write religious scripts or other religious writings for the people of England. These were the only people, which means the religious bodies, these were the only people who would given any incentives to write these kind of religious texts in English. I hope, my dear students, that you understand the separation of the English nobility from France by about 1250 and the spread of English among the upper class is manifest in the next 100 years of the English literature that was written. Well, types of polite literature that had appeared so far was all in French language. This was for the first time that some polite literature was written in English language. Romance as a form of literature was very, very popular in England, and this was for the first time that somewhere around the mid of the Middle Ages period that the writing of romance in English language started. In fact, before 1250, we find only one such instance of writing of romance. However, from 1250 onwards, translations and adaptations from French into English were made. And actually, through the 14th century, a number of translations were made and they were available in English. Religious literature that was written in the previous period, it continued, but along with that, secular literature was written and other forms of literature such as polite literature in English became popular. The period from 1250 to 1350 is a period thus of both religious and secular literature written in English language. Literature as a sign of wider diffusion of English language is very prominently seen during this time period. The period that follows, that is 1350 to 1400, in fact is a period of great English writers, individual writers who contributed a lot towards Middle English language. One of the famous names is of Geoffrey Chaucer. I assume you would have heard this name. From 1340 to 1400, he was one of the greatest poets before Shakespeare. One of his very popular works is the Canterbury Tales. I hope and I assume somewhere you would have come across this text as a student of English language and literature. This was a wonderful work that in its prologue, that is the general prologue, provides a matchless portrait gallery of contemporary types. So, different characters from different parts of England traveling together, going on a pilgrimage. This is what this work was about. And thus, Chaucer has not only documented the English language of those times, but also, very interestingly, he has documented a wide range of characters or the types of people of those times in the Middle English language. Though it was a piece of work that was very long, but the reader does not lose interest while reading it. And this becomes a manifestation of how English literature started its journey successfully.